It all began with a promise. One day, God's people would be as countless as the stars in the sky. People from every culture, class, and country would live as one under his kingdom rule. It seemed impossible. How could his kingdom reach that far? It would require God becoming king of the world. And he did. He built relationships with a small group of friends. He taught them and equipped them to minister to others. But most of all, he provided a way for them to experience the love of God as he died for the sins of the world and rose in triumph over death, proving he is Lord of all. Then he sent that small group of friends to the ends of the earth as his witnesses to spread the good news of his kingdom. It seemed a little crazy at first, just a little too big. How could a few people reach the world? It would take the power of God's Spirit going with them, and he did. One relationship at a time, these witnesses shared his love, and the good news went further than they could have ever dreamed. As the good news went forward from generation to generation to generation, God's kingdom reached the ends of the earth. Now we are being sent to reach the people God has placed in our lives. As we love and share the good news, we join Jesus on his mission and live sent. Until one day, like stars in the sky, people everywhere live under our King's gracious rule.
Good morning, Northridge Church. Welcome to the 10 o'clock online version of our Sunday weekend services. Once again, I just want to kind of provide a little context for what we're trying to do here. This is being released at 10 o'clock on Sunday morning. But really what you're getting from me right now is my run-through of the content of the message. It has not been polished up at all. You're getting the raw stuff. And we're going to try and do this or something like this throughout the summer, just to maintain connection for those of you who might be a little nervous about coming back to meet live. But make no mistake, our hope and our wish for you is that you would meet with us live on Sunday mornings or Saturday nights. We're doing everything that we're meant to do as far as masking up, distancing, limiting our numbers, providing sanitization stations. It's being done well. So we're creating a safe environment for you to regather. Speaking of last night, I kind of alluded to, last night was the first night where we were able to reintroduce the Men from Hope for Freedom Lodge. So at our SNL service, we had the guys there, and again, to be perfectly honest, I'm talking about this before it happens, but I'm really looking forward to it. So when you're watching it, it happened last night, but you get it, right? If everything goes well, we might even see them at the 11 o'clock service today. And so it's all stuff that I'm very excited about, reconnecting with these guys where we've had this connection, but it's been at an arm's length for so long. And I know there are a team of us that are really looking forward to loving on these guys and just reconnecting, hearing the stories of how things have been going. And so yeah, we're excited about that. I can't tell you everything, but today at the Spanish service at 1 o'clock, something very special is going to be happening. It's a secret right now, and so I can't tell you any more than that. But that's going to be fun too. So anyways, lots of things happening, and we really want you to reestablish that routine of meeting together. And so if you're watching this as a one-off, then bless you. But if this is your plan for the future, I really hope you'll reconsider and that you will find us live. Today, at the end of my message, I'm going to transition into a bit of a message. Well, not a bit of a message, a word from Lana in Costa Rica. We've got a video along with some pictures of what's going on there, just a bit of an update so that you can kind of be informed, mostly for how to pray. But then the other part, an important part, is it'll give you an opportunity to connect with the child sponsorship program. And it's a beautiful program that we're really excited about connecting you with. Many of you I know are already connected, but hopefully this will be the beginning of something beautiful and new for some, if not many of you. Okay, as far as today's message goes, we're talking about Paul's second missionary journey. Remember last week we introduced you to Paul and Barnabas and their first missionary journey. This week we're coming to you mostly from chapters 16 and 17 of Acts, but there's a little bit of kind of a prelude to their second missionary journey, and we see that in chapter 15, verses 36 to the end of chapter 15. So let me just read it to you and paint a picture of what's going down there. It says here in 15:36, "And after some days, Paul said to Barnabas, 'Let us return and visit the brothers in every city where we proclaim the word of the Lord and see how they are.'" So the plan is to revisit the steps of the first missionary journey. And he's saying, Barnabas, let's go. Verse 37 says, "Now Barnabas wanted to take with him John, called Mark." We met John Mark last week, but remember, John Mark left their last missionary journey a little bit early. Verse 38 says, "But Paul thought best not to take with them one who had been withdrawn from them in Pamphylia and had not gone with them to the work. And there arose a sharp disagreement, so that they separated from each other. Barnabas took Mark with him and sailed away to Cyprus, but Paul chose Silas and departed, having been commended by the brothers to the grace of the Lord. And he went through Syria and Cilicia, strengthening the churches." So it's an interesting little inter-church dynamic. We see stuff like this all the time, but I love how the Bible puts everything on display, even the difficult stuff. And again, what could be viewed as some kind of ugly tension between Paul and his good friend Barnabas, where they end up, it says here, it was a sharp disagreement and got to the point where they went their separate ways. Barnabas with John Mark, and then Paul with Silas. And on the surface, that could be my wife doesn't like tension. And so this is the kind of thing that would kind of wind her up. But what we see here too is this going of separate ways and almost doubling of the efforts, the missionary efforts. So that's what sets up chapter 16. And here in 16 and 17, we see records of Paul's missionary journey, his second missionary journey, this time with Silas. And just checking my little notes to see which parts I want to touch on. There's lots of little stories along the way, especially in chapter 16, but I want to build to one moment in particular with a longer story just before that. In chapter 16, verse 11, we see a section that is dedicated to the conversion of Lydia. Now, if you'll remember, several weeks back now, on Mother's Day, we taught about these amazing women in the book of Acts. And Lydia was one of those. Lydia was a highly successful businesswoman. She had brought with her brought with her from likely a part of Turkey, the skill of creating this purple dye. And so she would dye these fabrics, and she had, I don't want to say cornered the market, but she had a big market share of the purple dye industry. And so she's a very successful businesswoman. I want to read to you a quick little account of her story in Acts 16, just verses 14 and 15. It says this, "One who heard us was a woman called Lydia, from the city of Thyatira, a seller of purple goods who was a worshiper of God. The Lord opened her heart to pay attention to what was said by Paul. And after she was baptized, and her household as well, she urged us, saying, "If you have judged me to be faithful to the Lord, come by my house and stay." And she prevailed upon us. Lydia was offering a beautiful offering. She was giving what she had. God had blessed her with good business and the resources to buy a beautiful home. And she owned this home and invited Paul and Silas to stay there with her, because she knew that they were traveling throughout the land. This would be a place where she could stay. Where they could stay. All right, that's the story of Lydia. Moving on to really the next verse, verse 16. It begins this story. I'll just kind of give you the Cole's notes of the story. You can find this in Acts 16, verses 16 to 24. And it's the story of this slave girl. So this was a girl that was owned by some people in the area. And they owned her, and they used her essentially because she was filled with the spirit of divination. So she had this evil spirit in her that did allow her, it gave her the supernatural power to tell fortunes. She could tell a person's future. And so her owners, she was a slave, her owners would basically put her out to market and have her tell fortunes, and people would pay to have their fortune told, and then they would take that money. Well, she was filled with this evil spirit, and this evil spirit could discern in Paul and Silas the Spirit of the living God. And I wasn't going to read it, but I'm going to read one part. It said here, "She followed Paul and us, crying out, 'These men are servants of the Most High God, who proclaim to you the way of salvation.'" So this is a demon, essentially, crying out through this possessed body of a girl, proclaiming what Paul's doing, that they serve the one true God, the Most High God. It says here in verse 18, and this she kept doing for many days. Paul, having become greatly annoyed, turned and said to the spirit, "I command you in the name of Jesus Christ to come out of her." And it came out that very hour. The story goes on. As you can imagine, the slave owners, who were making quite a living selling her skill as a fortune teller, now this evil spirit of divination is out of her body and she is not able to tell fortunes anymore. They are not pleased. Their source of income has been taken away from them. And so they start to rally the local authorities and speaking badly of Paul and Silas. And what you need to understand is Paul and Silas are strangers in the area. So they have no reputation, whereas these slave owners would be known to the local authorities. And so their voice would be louder. And they were saying that Paul and Silas were doing these terrible things. And so the local authorities came and they beat Paul and Silas and they threw them in jail. So that's what they get for setting this slave girl free from this evil spirit. Interesting story. And then what that does is that takes us to the scene where they're in the jail, and their response to being jailed, I think, is instructive to us as Christians when things don't go our way, perhaps when the government isn't doing things that you would think are godly things. Their response was to pray and sing hymns. And it says here in verse 25, at about midnight, they were having this little hymn fest, singing songs to God. This is after being shackled. It says specifically, verse 24, having received this order, he put them in the inner prison and fastened their feet in the stocks. So they were likely locked in a prison, but then within that prison they had stocks. I don't know if you remember the olden days where they kind of have their head in a hole and people could throw fruit at them, or vegetables too, I guess. They were locked away, and yeah, there was no real threat of them escaping because they were quite locked down tight. And their response was to be praying and just singing. Well, I'm going to read beginning in verse 25 of the account. I'm going to go, I'm going to read a larger section here, so bear with me. It says, verse 25, about midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God, and the prisoners were listening to them. And suddenly there was a great earthquake, so that the foundations of the prison were shaken, and immediately all the doors were opened, and everyone's bonds were unfastened. When the jailer woke and saw that the prison doors were open, he drew his sword and was about to kill himself, supposing that the prisoners had escaped. But Paul cried with a loud voice, "Do not harm yourself, for we are here." And the jailer called for lights and rushed in, and trembling with fear, he fell down before Paul and Silas. Then he brought them out and said, "Sirs, what must I do to be saved?" And they said, "Believe in the Lord Jesus, and you'll be saved, you and your household." And they spoke the word of the Lord to him and to all who were in his house. And he took them that same hour of the night and washed their wounds, and he was baptized at once, he and all his family. Then he brought them up into his house and set foot before them, and he rejoiced along with his entire household that he had believed in God. Verse 35 says, "But when it was day, the magistrates sent the police, saying, 'Let those men go.' And the jailer reported these words to Paul, saying, 'The magistrates have sent me to let you go. Therefore come out now and go in peace.' But Paul said to them, 'They have beaten us publicly, uncondemned men who are Roman citizens, and have thrown us into prison. And do they now throw us out secretly? No, let them come themselves and take us out.' The police reported these words to the magistrates, and they were afraid when they heard that they were Roman citizens. So they came and apologized to them, and they took them out and asked them to leave the city. So they went out of the prison and visited Lydia." This is the Lydia that they had met with before. "And when they had seen the brothers, they encouraged them and departed." Pretty cool story where God, I'm going to just have a sip of, where God took care of Paul and Silas, set them free, but in the process, set the jailer and his family free for eternity. A beautiful story. This brings us into chapter 17, where Paul and Silas go to Thessalonica and Berea and find themselves in Athens. And this is where, I think this is where I want to pick up. Yeah. Find themselves in Athens. And this to me is a transformative moment in the ministry of Paul and Silas. And I'm just going to read it to you, and then I'll break it down, break down some of the things we can draw out of this. Beginning in verse 16, let me read down to verse 21 real quick. This is them in Athens. "Now while Paul was waiting for them at Athens, his spirit was provoked within him, as he saw that the city was full of idols. So he reasoned in the synagogue with the Jews and the devout persons, and in the marketplace every day with those who happened to be there. Some of the Epicurean and Stoic philosophers also conversed with him. Some said, 'What does this babbler wish to say?' Others said, 'He seems to be a preacher of foreign divinities,' because he was preaching Jesus and the resurrection. And they took him and brought him to the Areopagus, saying, 'May we know what this new teaching is that you are presenting? For you bring some strange things to our ears. We wish to know, therefore, what these things mean.' Now all the Athenians and the foreigners who lived there would spend their time in nothing except telling or hearing something new." We talked about the Areopagus, I think, again on Mother's Day. And this was the place where people knew that they could gather for almost like these TED Talks. And it was a double whammy in the sense that the people who spoke there were people of great repute. or people who had a reputation for knowing what they were talking about. But then added on top of that, the people who gathered to listen were thinkers. Thinking was a highly thought of, highly considered hobby, I guess, at the time. It was, oh, thank you. Just pause. Sorry about that. I'm back. And now I have a key. What I was saying was that the Areopagus was known for being this breeding ground for ideas, this sharing, oftentimes ideas that were coming from foreign lands, and just people treasured new ideas and new thought, and they wouldn't just digest them. This wasn't a place where people just showed up to look the part. They genuinely cared, and they would go back and they would meditate on or just chew on what they had learned. So I'm trying to think of, all right. So Paul has basically been invited to take the stage. People have been hearing the conversations or hearing about the conversations he's been having just in the marketplace with people, and so they want to know more, and they're turning the spotlight on him. They're giving him the microphone, metaphorically speaking. And this is what we see in verse 22. So Paul, standing in the midst of the Areopagus, said, "Men of Athens, I perceive that in every way you are very religious. For as I passed along and observed the objects of your worship, I found also an altar with this inscription." It says this: "To the unknown God. What therefore you worship as unknown, this I proclaim to you. The God who made the world and everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in temples made by man, nor is he served by human hands as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all mankind life and breath and everything. And he made from one man every nation of mankind to live in all the face of the earth, having determined allotted periods and the boundaries of their dwelling place, that they should seek God and perhaps feel their way toward him and find him. Yet he is actually not far from each one of us." And in verse 28, he quotes, "For in him we live and move and have our being, as even some of your own poets have said, for we are indeed his offspring." Verse 29 says, "Being then God's offspring, we ought not to think that the divine being is like a gold or silver or stone, an image formed by the art and imagination of man. The times of ignorance God overlooked, but now he commands all people everywhere to repent, because he has fixed a day on which he will judge the world in righteousness by a man whom he has appointed, and of this he has given assurance to all by raising him from the dead." He's talking about Jesus. "Now when they heard of the resurrection of the dead, some mocked, but others said, 'We will hear you again about this.' So Paul went out from their midst, but some men joined him and believed, among whom also were Dionysius the Areopagite, and a woman named Damaris, and others with them." So this is the incredible story of Paul, and I look at the skill and wisdom exercised by Paul. Paul sometimes could be, well, if you look at his origin story, he was somebody who went around killing people for a living. But here he was just so full of the Spirit. You could almost tell that the way he walked through this situation was not of his own doing. You see, backing up, Paul saw a common problem in the city of Athens. Idol worship was rampant. Literally carved idols were probably being hawked in the marketplace, and they probably adorned just about every dwelling place. And people took it seriously. They would worship these idols. They would fear these idols. They would feel protected by these idols. And Paul obviously discerned that this was a problem, but he took his opportunity and he built a bridge. And I think this is super important. We know that Paul's not afraid to speak the truth very directly. He will be straight up about the fact that when he's talking to the Jewish people, that they killed Jesus, the Son of God. He didn't mince words. He didn't dance around it. But here he saw, or the Spirit revealed to him, the need for finesse. The need to build bridges and then use those bridges as a foundation for the potential new relationship with Jesus. And remember, he starts everything by saying, well, you are obviously very devoutly religious. You clearly care about your gods. And he says, and I happen to notice that you have this one monument to the unknown God. And Paul brought it all to that point, and then he pounced. He says, and guess what? That God has a name. He is the living God. He's the one true God. And you can know him. You can have a relationship with him. He goes on to say that the idols that you're carving and displaying and selling, that's not the one true God. You can know the one true God. And he referred to Jesus as being the ultimate judge. And remember, when he talked about Jesus dying and then being resurrected, some people were like, oh, okay, no, this isn't a very good TED Talk. We're getting out of here. We can't believe this. But others are like, well, hang on. This makes sense. Tell us more. And he leveraged a problem, the problem being idolatry, and used it as a platform for the gospel. And man, I tell you, I think there's a couple of things. We've got to be bold enough to speak the truth when the truth is required in its most direct format. But I think that the people who are truth tellers, who are very blunt and direct, can sometimes do that while foregoing relationship, while glossing over the fact that there's a human interaction happening. And they can come in so hot and heavy that they end up blowing up a potential bridge rather than creating one. And there are times when, even when people do the most horrific things, if we take a moment, we can have empathy and find some common ground to realize that what they were doing was rooted in good intentions. You know, my dad famously says, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and that can be true. And that's where we need to not just empathize and understand where they're coming from, but then in that relationship, redirect them to where their hope really, truly can be placed. So that's kind of the end of chapter 17, and so I'm going to leave that there for Paul's second missionary journey. But right now we want to transition into a time of hearing from a modern-day missionary. Lana and John are in Costa Rica. And if you didn't hear it last week, Lana is someone near and dear, born and raised in, I think, Port Coquitlam. And she's now been in Costa Rica for years and years. Well, she's provided us with an update as to what's going on. And I want you to pay attention to that. Pay attention to the things that you can pray for. But then beyond that, there's also going to be an invitation to partner with Lana and become more involved for the first time with Costa Rica Kids, which is a child sponsorship program. And she'll direct you to a way to learn more about that child sponsorship program. as I was going to say as your pastor, but I just want you to know how highly I think of Lana and John, but then also how highly I feel about the program. I've been to Costa Rica. I've seen their operations, and I'll just give you a quick story. One of the things that I just found very telling is we've, for years as a church and as individuals, we've been partnering financially, sending teams down to Costa Rica. My oldest son and Tawny and there's a team that went down to Costa Rica. But I've seen the way they steward the gifts that come from Canada. So one thing that got fundraised for was a Costa Rica kids van, and so they showed me the van. I was down with Brent and Michelle, and they showed me the van. And I'll tell you what, I've never been in a vehicle so clean in my life. And on it, there's posted signs that say something to the effect of, "This is a gift from God. Treat it like that." And to me, that was so inspiring to see that this wasn't, when we gave financial gifts, they weren't going to this kind of purse with holes in it. They treasured and stewarded well the gift that came. And I think that's a consistent trait of Costa Rica kids and of Lana and John as people. So with that, I'm going to transition into the video of Lana. Watch it, be blessed, and I pray that you'll be stirred to action. Until next week, take care.
Hello, Northridge Foursquare Church. My name is Lana Davidson. I am a Canadian Foursquare missionary serving here in Costa Rica alongside of my Costa Rican husband, John, and our sons, Gabrielle and Josh. We run a school sponsorship program to send needy kids to school, backpack, uniforms, school supplies, and shoes, with the goal that we use this program as an opportunity to open the door for us to share the message of evangelism, of discipleship with the families, the message of hope through meeting their physical needs. We currently have over 1,030 children in the program. We work in 32 different communities in 3 zones of the country. Right now, we are in the throes of our 3rd wave of COVID here. COVID has hit Costa Rica very hard. We had just last week 3,600 new cases in one day, and we have a population of 5 million, which is about the size of British Columbia, but we are the size of Vancouver Island, just over the size of Vancouver Island. So it has hit us very, very hard. The hospital system is completely maxed out. There are no beds for even normal urgent surgeries, car accidents. They are all being taken up by COVID patients. Patients are waiting in the hall. It's a very difficult time here right now. Our economy has hit an all-time low, and it is affecting, as it usually does, those who are most in need. So our kids in the program are in desperate need at this time. There are families that are even struggling to just put food on their tables. But we are hanging on to a promise that the Lord gave us back in November of 2019, which was the word harvest. And we expected 2020 to be this big harvest. We had no idea what was to come. But in May, we asked the Lord, how do we continue to bring in the harvest if we're not even out on the field? We have driving restrictions and curfews, and we're just not able to go and visit the families because of the restrictions right now. So Lord, how do we bring in the harvest? And he promised us, he gave us a second prophetic word that said that he was hanging on to the harvest, that he was holding it in his hand, that he was protecting it from the winds, from the rains, from the storms. We didn't have any idea what was to come, but we have held on to that promise, and we are focusing right now on helping the families dig deep. So we are doing daily devotionals with them. We are doing phone calls and prayer ministry, and just really believing that it is the Lord that they can look to in this time, that he is their only answer in this time. And so we're excited because we're believing that even now God is bringing in the harvest, but we're excited about the harvest, the big harvest that is to come when we're able to be back with the families. This past year, we have been able to hand out our school supply portion of the program, but not the uniforms yet. So we're praying for that opportunity, that God will open the door. Currently, all the schools are shut shut down for 7 weeks as we try to lower our numbers. But we're believing that we'll be able to hopefully go and see the family soon. But it's just too much personal contact for us to be able to hand over the uniforms and size the kids and travel to different communities and just risk transferring COVID is just something we don't want to take that chance to put the families in danger or to put our volunteers in danger. So we would ask that you would please continue to pray with us. We are so grateful for your support, and your prayers during this time means the world to us, and just knowing and hanging on to that promise. So if you will hang on to that promise with us and believe for that, we look forward to seeing this mighty harvest of souls that the Lord has promised. If you would like more information about child sponsorship, you can check us out on the foursquare.ca website, www.foursquare.ca, or you can email me and get in touch with me that way, lana.costarica@gmail.com. I'd love to share more about what's happening here or share more information about the program. We're so grateful for your prayers, and we thank you for your partnership, Northridge. We send you much love. We hope to be able to see you in person real soon. Take care. God bless.